Okay, I think... Is that live? I think that's live. I think so. Maybe. Okay. Let me do that. All right. So today, the plan. I need to finally finish this contract law video. And then once I finish it, I want to summarize the important notes that I actually want to remember. And yeah. Where are we up to? We're 138. Okay, we're almost done. This has been a tough video to get through. It's been a little bit boring. He's a great teacher though. There's a lot. He's been giving like great examples, but it has been a little bit tough. So where are we up to? We'll go back a little bit, see if I can remember it. But termination by agreement, the different ways of ending a contract, and yeah.
Contract. You say to me,
Condition
look,
subsequent.
Anthony, I really appreciate the work, but I'm also applying for other weekend work.
All right.
And if I get one of those jobs, I won't be able to keep mowing the lawn.
Okay.
So we put in the contract a condition subsequent, saying that if you get other employment on the weekends, the contract will be terminated. If you do get work, the contract is over and we're all happy. If you don't get work, well, then you keep mowing the lawns and we're all happy.
Okay.
Now, it's easy to get confused between conditions precedent and conditions subsequent because they work in opposite ways. A condition precedent is something that must happen if we want the contract to continue. A condition subsequent is something that must not happen if we want the contract to continue.
Okay.
Finally, of course, parties can simply agree to end their contract. This is called termination by accord or release, and it's a type of termination by agreement.
Okay, so
now we know two ways for contracts to be terminated,
termination
by performance and by agreement. Next, we're going to turn to termination by frustration.
Oh, frustration.
Now, frustration, of course, is an emotion which most law students know well. But in contract law, it has a particular meaning. Frustration occurs when some external event happens, something outside the control of either party. But the effect of that is to completely change the nature of the bargain, so that now the party's obligations under the contract mean something completely different to what the parties understood when the contract commenced. This is one of those concepts that's a lot easier to understand.
Okay, so like, if we have a contract for you to mow my lawn and an alien spaceship comes down and blasts my house out of the ground, there's a huge crater there. Well, there's no lawn. There's no lawn to mow. Contract is terminated by frustration, right? Not at the fault of either party, unless I pissed off the alien species. But what would be more realistic? Well, I guess, yeah, like a weather event, you know, like a mudslide. Maybe, I don't know, something happens to the lawn.
Once you see some examples. So let's look at a few. The first one is the destruction of the subject matter.
Yeah.
The classic case here was called Taylor and Caldwell, which was a contract for the hire of an amusement hall. Oh. Taylor and his compatriots went to some expense to prepare and advertise a range of events at the music hall, from which they intended to make money. But through no fault of Caldwell's, the music hall burned to the ground a week before the event.
Yeah. Okay.
Taylor then sued Caldwell for failing to provide the venue. But the court found that the contract was frustrated. Promising to hire out an amusement hall becomes a completely different type of promise when the amusement hall burns to the ground. Another case, Morgan and Manser, was a case where a music hall performer received a contract to perform, but then he was called up for service in the Second World War.
Okay.
As a result, the contract was frustrated. It was needed.
I was thinking, I don't know, is it called eminent domain? Say if they say with a lawn mowing contract example, eminent domain, where the government eminent domain. Maybe that would, yeah, like if your house is seized, whatever, acquired for by eminent domain. Do we have this in Australia? Eminent domain, Australian law. Whoops, I meant to close this one, not the other one. Seems like we have some sort of... Yeah, okay. We have some sort of version. Okay.
Neither party's fault, and the contract became impossible to perform. A third case is one of the famous coronation cases. It's called Krell and Henry. Henry leased 2 rooms and balconies from which somebody could watch the king's coronation procession. But the procession was then cancelled because the king got sick. Now,
watching the coronation was the primary. What is it called? Was the express terms, intermediate terms? What is it called? What? It's like the important part, the emphasized part of the contract is watching the coronation, not, being able to chill in the balcony. Whatever, it's in here somewhere. What is it? It's promise theory. It's in one of these. I think it's one of these. Might be an express term. Anyway.
The renter could have still used the balconies, but there was nothing to see. The whole basis of the contract had been destroyed, and it was neither party's fault. See how it works? Now, there are a couple more things to know about frustration. First up, a contract doesn't become frustrated just because honouring the contract turns...
Not frustrated just because it becomes more difficult and expensive to complete. Okay, I should write this down. Whoops. It's something that changes, that makes it basically impossible.
Turns out to be a lot more inconvenient or expensive than was initially expected. It has to be rendered a different contract, or the performance has to become performance of a completely different type. Second, frustration only affects future obligations under the contract. Any obligations which fell due before the frustrating event are still enforceable. So if we think about Morgan and Manser, if the contract had been for 10 performances and he received his call up to join the army after the third performance, well, both parties' obligations in relation to those first three would be enforceable. The second thing to ask is what the consequences are if a contract is frustrated. Now, it all depends on whether there has been what we call a total failure of consideration. In other words, has either side given consideration for something and got absolutely nothing back in return? In that case, they may be able to recover their consideration. However, if there has been some form of consideration in return, any sort of consideration at all, then the losses will lie where they fall. The parties just walk away from the contract in whatever circumstances they happen to be in at the time of the frustrating event.
Okay. Total failure of consideration rescission can be obtained. No total failure of consideration losses lie where they fall. And so if I look up the hold on, let me make a new, so I can do rescission. How do you spell rescission? Do I not have a, did I spell it wrong? Rescinded. 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 Do I have a definition of? No. What? Why are these different words? What, I mean, they are, but like, why is rescinded RESC and rescission is REC? Oh my god. Oh, maybe it's Australian versus American spelling, and maybe my spell check here is rescission definition is US. There's an SC in here. Oh my god, but it doesn't have it here. But I want, is this for, this is not for Australia. I need contract law rescission Australia. I didn't even type in Australia. That would help. Jamieson, probably fine. WAU. This must be in some act, defined in some act. Undo, reverse, restore parties to original positions. Rescind. I wonder if Ostley has a definition. Ooh. Case for rejecting cash. Oh, no. And a sunset rescission and divorce order. What is this link? Okay. Okay, I'll keep this for now, but at some point, it would be good to find some examples, some actual examples of what has happened. And also because I wonder if there's like a difference between, maybe not. I wonder if there's a difference between like the different ways a contract can end, like voided, rescinded. What's the other one? Terminated. I wonder if if like. Okay, never mind. Let's put this in for now. And where am I gonna put it? I'm gonna put it. Just put it down here. I'm just gonna put rescission / rescission. So if I'm Control Fing it in the future, I can find it. And we'll put this here. Beautiful. Okay.
Event. Now, this, of course, can result in injustice.
Oh. Okay.
A frustrating event. Now, this, of course, can result in injustice. And in New South Wales, South Australia and Victoria, the Parliament has made laws allowing the court to try and find a fair outcome in the case of frustrated contracts. Finally, it's time for us to talk about a breach in the discharge of a contract. How does a contract end when someone just doesn't keep their promise? Well, in the first case, if there's a failure to perform, we have to look way back to the second part of this lecture and think about whether it's a condition or a warranty or an intermediate term that's been breached.
Oh, right. The condition is the important thing. Warranty is what you'd like to have, and intermediate could be either, right? Condition. Yeah, these are the important. Right. And so, with the balcony, viewing the royal procession, when renting the balcony, the condition is the important thing is actually being able to view the royal procession, right? Not actually that specific balcony. Well, maybe I guess, but like without the royal procession being there, then it doesn't really matter. Then the contract doesn't really matter, because that's the core part. That's the core point of it. Whereas maybe a warranty might be like the balcony being clean, or there being like nice functional chairs. Nice to have. Maybe it's not necessary to put into the contract. But yeah.
Breached. If it's a condition or an intermediate term that's acting like a condition, then a breach will give the innocent party the capacity to end the contract.
Yeah.
Then a breach will give the innocent party the capacity to end the contract.
Yeah, so conditions breached. If conditions breached, then innocent party can end the contract.
If it's a warranty or an intermediate term which is acting like a warranty,
if warranty
well then the
still value, yeah. Contract and the innocent party can't end the contract.
The contract will continue, but another remedy such as damages will be available.
But damages, right?
So how do we know when there's a failure to perform? Well, that very much turns on the contents of the individual contract. If the promises are delivered on, well, there's no breach. If promises are broken, there's a breach. The party alleging the breach will need to prove that it occurred. It's not that complicated, really. The more interesting breach cases involve what are called repudiation and anticipatory breach. Repudiation occurs when a party simply turns around and says, I'm not going to be bound by my promise anymore. So it's different to a normal breach where a party just hasn't completed their obligations. If Saturday came along and there was no sign of you in your mower and I called to say, hey, where are you? And your answer was, look, you can keep your money. I'm not mowing your lawn. It's hot and dirty and there's cricket on the TV. Well, you would have repudiated the contract. Now, if you repudiate the contract, there's a number of things I can do about it. I can terminate the contract, of course, but I don't have to. I can leave the contract on foot if I want and demand that you either meet your promise or pay me damages for failing to do so. A third type of breach is a special breed of repudiation which we call anticipatory breach. This happens where the time hasn't yet come for someone to deliver on their promise, but it's clear to you that they're not going to.
Right. Okay. Failure to perform, breach. If the other party is clearly going to breach.
Well, in that case, you can terminate the contract for breach and sue for damages immediately. You don't actually have to wait for the breach to occur. This happened in the great yo-yo case, Hammer and Barrow against Coca-Cola. Hammer and Barrow were manufacturing those cool Coca-Cola yo-yos which used to be...
Hammer. Okay, cool. Okay, yeah. That
Hammer
makes
and
sense.
Barrow were manufacturing those cool Coca-Cola yo-yos which used to be all the rage back when I was at school. Coca-Cola ordered 200,000. The first batch of 85,000 was delivered, and from those,
Warranty.
60,000 were defective. Coca-Cola didn't have to wait for the other 115,000 to be delivered before ending the contract and suing for damages. Otherwise, heaven knows how many defective yo-yos they'd have had on their hands. Okay, so we've got a breach. What sort of remedies can we get as a result of the breach? During this video, you've heard me talk from time to time about damages.
I don't know.
And damages are the primary form of remedy under the common law. Damages are essentially...
Breach. Remedies.
Damages are the...
Damages. Remedies.
primary form of remedy under the common law. Damages are essentially the payment of money which seeks to compensate the other party for the harm caused by the breach. Now, how is the damages calculated? Well, in some ways that's a matter for the court and a matter for the evidence which each side brings to the court about what the extent of the loss was. But there are four key principles. First, damages are calculated at the date of the breach, not at the date of the trial. This is important because sometimes it can take a long time for a matter to come to trial.
Yeah.
And if we're talking about something like real estate or commodities, then the value of those might change quite considerably between the time of the breach and the time of the judgment.
Yeah, but... it's tricky because, like... I wonder if... Like, say you had a contract to say there was a contract between a landowner and a builder, and the builder didn't do a very good job on some part, and of the house, and making it unsaleable. We'll just keep it simple, making it completely unsaleable, unlivable. And the landowner wants to sue, or wants a remedy, wants financial compensation, because they weren't able to live in the house, then they had to like rent somewhere else. I'm just thinking, like, there would be if there's a delay, if there's a long period of time between the breach of the contract and when it actually all gets sorted out in the court. Imagine if you have. Imagine if as a landowner you had put all your money into building the house, and you couldn't afford to keep, like, you didn't anticipate that you were going to have to rent for another couple of years while it gets sorted out in the courts, because you had anticipated, there was in the contract that the builder would be done by a certain time, that the house would be ready to live in by a certain time. So there's like a 2-year, say there's like a 2-year period of you renting after the breach occurred and before it's all sorted out in the courts. It's not really fair that the builder is liable for that, because that's really on the court system's efficiency, right? Like, that would be crazy. But then again, those damages wouldn't have occurred, or that that unexpected 2 years of renting wouldn't have occurred if not for the builder. This is There's no way the court would give compensation for being inefficient. That seems like it'd be very problematic as well.
Second, damages are calculated on a once and for all basis. So if a party gets an award of damages, the award of damages will completely settle the liabilities between the parties in relation to that breach. If it later turns out that the damage was worse than expected, you can't go back for more. Damages are a one-off, once and for all award. However, when calculating those damages, parties are in fact allowed to claim for what are called expectation damages. So, for instance, if a party is unable to make the expected profit because of a breach, well, they can claim damages for that lost profit. If they've missed out on other opportunities because they invested their resources in the breached contract, they can potentially claim for those lost opportunities.
Right.
Finally, the parties don't need to leave it to the court to decide what the damages are going to be. In fact, many contracts actually set out what the damages are going to be in the event of a breach. These are known as liquidated damages. And there's nothing wrong with this. The court will enforce that liquidated damages clause even if it results in different damages to what the court would have chosen. The only time that the court won't enforce that liquidated damages clause is if it's so outrageous that it becomes what we call a penalty. So it functions more as a punishment than merely as a form of compensation. Now, this might sound obvious, but you can only get damages for the harm which is actually caused by the breach. How do we tell? How do we distinguish harm which was caused by the breach from other sorts of harm that might have other causes? This issue is called causation, and we apply a rule called the rule in Hadley and Baxendale. It has two main questions, which are known as the two limbs. It has two main questions, which are known as the two limbs. First, it asks whether the harm arose naturally from the breach.
Arising naturally from the breach. Oh, causation. How to establish causation. From the breach.
Normal course of things. In other words, if it's self-evidently obvious that the harm arose from a breach, then causation is proven. Second, it asks whether the harm is a type of harm which was reasonably within the contemplation of the parties at the time of the contract. And if it was, well then the harm can be considered to have been caused by the breach. Let me give you an example. Let's say I had received a letter from my local council telling me that my lawn required work and that if I didn't have it mowed by the 1st of June, well then I'd be fined under the bylaws.
Well, the date is the important thing, and mowing the lawn.
Mowed by local council, telling me that my lawn required work and that if I didn't have it mowed by the 1st of June, well then I'd be fined under the bylaws. And so I contact you and we make a contract for you to mow my lawn no later than the 31st of May. And I tell you that the reason I'm hiring you is that the council is threatening to fine me if I don't mow the lawn by the 1st of June. Now let's imagine that for one reason or another you didn't mow the lawn until the 4th of June and I got a fine. Can you see that your breach has caused me to be fined? And the possibility of that fine was within our contemplation at the time of the contract. I'd most likely be successful in suing you to recover the amount of the fine. Now there are a couple of things to consider on the other side of this whole equation. You see, even the innocent party might have some obligations in the event of a breach. The first obligation is what we refer to as mitigation of loss. So if someone else's breach has caused you a loss, but there are reasonable things that you can do in order.
Yeah. Because it would make sense that you can just exacerbate the loss, or by not doing anything, allow more loss to occur. Right.
To minimise that loss, then you may not be able to claim for the whole loss. So let's go back to the scenario we used a moment ago. And let's say that on the 27th of May, you contacted me and said, Anthony, I'm not going to be able to complete our contract before the 1st of June. Let's say the fine was going to be $400. What can I do to mitigate my loss? Well, I could go out immediately and ask another mowing company to come around the next day and do
Or
the
ask the
mowing.
council for an extension.
But because of the short notice, they're going to charge me $120. Under contract law, what I should do is pay the $120 and then seek damages from you of $120. Because by doing that, I have mitigated or reduced, and in this case removed, the risk of the $400 fine.
Yeah.
So I'm obliged to take those steps to mitigate my loss. But the costs of that mitigation can be recovered in damages. In the same
Right. Costs of... Yeah, that's right.
same
That
way,
makes sense.
if I pay money to repair or rectify something that was damaged or left undone by your breach, well then I can generally recover the money which was properly spent on that rectification or repair, provided it was reasonable and necessary. All right, the clock's ticking on us now, but I reckon we'll get there. The other thing that might affect the innocent party in terms of damages is what we call contributory negligence. This occurs when something done negligently by the non-breaching party causes an increase in the harm from the breach. The classic case was called Lexmead and Lewis, where a farmer bought a defective towing hitch and continued to use it even after he knew it was defective. When the hitch broke and caused an accident resulting in 2 deaths, part of the fault rests with the supplier of the defective hitch, but the farmer's contributory negligence also counted because the farmer had continued to use that hitch even after he knew it was defective. So can you see, if your own negligence contributes to the harm, you can't get damages for all of the harm. Okay, so much for damages. A second type of remedy is what we call restitution. Restitution is based on the idea that if a person is unjustly enriched
Hold on. Restitution?
by their a second type of remedy is what we call restitution.
Oh, damages. Okay, so that was all damages. Now we're on to restitution. What line is that? You know, it would be nice if each of these lines could be color-coded. I wonder if there's a... Hold on. Let me, I'm curious. Obsidian. What are these lines called? These are called guidelines. Tab guidelines color-coded. Something like that? Indents, indentation... Oh, yeah. Tab. Oh. Sad behavior when using the tab keys. Code block. Or I could have the color of the whole text change. That could be interesting. Hold on, let me have a look. Community plugins, browse, indent. Guide, color. It's not a plugin for it. Tabs. Tabs color. This is fine. That's fine.
Restitution is based on the idea that if a person...
Right, restitution. Oh, enriched by their breach. Oh, okay.
is unjustly enriched by their breach of a contract, they may have to pay restitution to the other party to offset that enrichment. So let's say you came round and mowed my lawn, but then I discovered that the contract was actually illegal. Because let's imagine that to mow lawns for a profit, you need an Australian business number, a licence and a paid-up insurance policy. And you didn't have those. Now, on that basis, the contract would not be enforceable. So I could wait until after you'd mowed the lawn and then refuse to pay. Because the contract is unenforceable, you wouldn't be able to do anything about it, right? Well, under the principles of restitution, you might be able to claim the payment for the work that you have done. Because otherwise I would be unjustly enriched. It would be against good conscience for me to keep the money I'd also have the benefit of your labour. Now let's look at some of the equitable remedies that might be available to a court. Remember, it's a basic principle of law that equity follows the law. So if damages are going to be reasonably capable of compensating a party for harm, well then damages will be the remedy ordered by the courts. However, if damages are not an appropriate remedy, the court may consider a number of remedies in equity. The first one to mention is called specific performance. This is where the court orders the breaching party to fulfil one or more of its obligations under the contract. The most common example
Requires the completion of some obligation under the contract. Okay.
occurs in real estate sales. If a party refuses for one reason or another to sign the transfer in the sale, then the other party, the plaintiff, can seek an order for specific performance, where the court would order them to sign the transfer. Now, to make an order of specific performance, a couple of requirements have to be met. First, the court has to be able to set out very precisely the performance to be specified, and that in turn means it has to have been set out very clearly in the contract. Second, it has to be a single one-off obligation to be performed. The court will not order specific performance of any obligation which would then require ongoing supervision by the court to see whether the order was being followed. A second equitable remedy is almost the polar opposite of specific performance. This is called an injunction. Generally, an injunction is an order by the court that a party must not do something. But it can also sometimes be an order that a party must do something, even if it's something not specifically
about
said.
Preliminary injunction a lot in politics. Preliminary injunction. Australian law. I just want a definition for dummies, you know? Court injunctions. Good old Jameson law. Give me some future injunctions. Prohibits, forbids a person or legal entity from performing an action or requires the person or legal entity to do something. Purpose, to protect the rights of a person or legal entity in situations where the infringement of these rights would have consequences which could not be remedied either by damages or other remedy. Right. Right. What was the other type of injunction? There's preliminary injunction. What's a TRO? Oh no, that's temporary restraining order. No, what was the other one? There was another one that was like this. Okay, so if Okay, but the key thing is that they can't be remedied. So like if someone's going to die or if someone's going to die as a result of not doing the thing, then the court death can't be remedied by damages or some other remedy. Death is kind of final. That's where maybe a injunction would be appropriate.
Out in the contract. So for instance, let's say we made our lawn mowing contract, and as part of that contract you agreed that you would not contract to mow anyone else's lawn on Saturday mornings. And then I found out you were doing so. Well, I might seek an injunction to stop you from mowing that other person's lawns. Quite often, injunctions are used on what we call an interlocutory basis, which means the court might make an injunction at the very start of a proceeding, well before the matter comes to trial, in order to stop the harm from growing in the time that it will take to get to the actual trial. So, for instance, a person who was alleged to have been telling trade secrets might find an interlocutory injunction prohibiting them from making blog posts about the industry until such time as the court can work out whether they really have breached the contract by telling trade secrets. The final type of equitable remedy that I want to discuss is called rescission. Rescission is an...
Okay. Let's see how close this was. Tries to restore the parties to the position they were prior to the contract being formed. Okay, so that's fine.
An equitable remedy which seeks to bring the parties back to their positions prior.
And he's spelling it with an SC here. Maybe the REC was a typo earlier in the YouTube video. So this is a type of equitable. Yeah. Okay, we'll put this, and this is the type of equitable remedy. Whoops.
To the contract. So it tries to undo the contract from the very beginning. So imagine a contract for the sale of a defective product. Well, rescission would occur if the court ordered me to give back the product and the store to give back my money. In many cases, of course, rescission is not...
Okay, I found a good source for injunctions, which I should read at some point. Further reading. Boom.
Not practically possible, because under the contract, people may have done things that can't be undone. So, for instance, in our lawn mowing contract, you can't unmow my lawn. So rescission is not practically possible. Now, once upon a time, that would have been the lot for remedies. However, earlier in this video, I talked a little bit about the Australian consumer law, particularly in relation to misleading and deceptive conduct, and also in relation to the consumer guarantees that are implied into consumer contracts. If the Australian consumer law is broken, then the consumer law itself provides its own remedies. Any breach of those consumer guarantees will be classified as either a major or a minor failure. A failure is major if it means that the goods or services are unsafe, or if they depart...
Okay. So ACL has its own remedies in case of a breach, major failure. Goods are
substantially from the description which was initially promised, or if there is a failure so substantial that the consumer wouldn't have purchased the goods or services if they'd known of the failure. Now, if a...
So, faulty consumer would not have bought the product if they were informed. Yeah, okay.
Goods or services if they'd known of the failure. Now, if a failure isn't major, if it doesn't meet those descriptions, then it's minor. In the case of a major failure, the consumer can reject the goods.
Oh. Goods, if the failure doesn't meet the above the major failure requirements. Consequences.
Goods or services. Or alternatively, they can take legal action under the Act to recover any lost value. So that is the difference in value between the product as it is and its value if the failure had not occurred. If the failure is minor, then it's the supplier who gets the options. They have the option of replacing the product, repairing it, or refunding the cost price. Now, those are the remedies that the individual consumer can go after under the Australian Consumer Law. In addition, there are some remedies that can be sought by the Australian Competition and Consumer Commission on behalf of consumers of that product generally. These measures can include pecuniary penalties, so financial penalties. They can include a compensation order, that compensation be paid to customers. They can include an injunction to prevent the supplier from continuing to breach the Australian Consumer Law. And they can include what's called an enforceable undertaking, where the supplier agrees to some course of action which is intended to rectify the harm caused by its product, and where the ACCC can take further action against the supplier if the undertaking is not delivered on. Oh my goodness, here we are. We've looked at how a contract is formed by two or more parties with capacity, who intend to create legal relations, who have offer and acceptance, who give consideration, and whose contract is sufficiently certain and complete. We've looked at express terms, including exclusion clauses and unwritten express clauses. We've looked at implied terms, whether they're implied to fill in gaps in a contract or whether they're implied as a matter of law. We've looked at factors like mistake, misrepresentation, undue influence, unconscionable conduct, and illegality, all of which can make a contract void. And we've looked at contracts ending by performance, agreement, frustration, and breach. And if there's a breach, we've looked at the common law remedy of damages, we've looked at the equitable remedies, and the remedies under the Australian Consumer Law. Stop the clock. I really do hope this has been helpful to you, either as a brief overview and introduction to contract law, or as a basis of revision if you've studied this material already. If you've found it to be useful, please keep an eye out for future 2-hour courses, because I'm hoping this one won't be the last.
Okay. Okie dokie. So, close that. Okay, now to figure out what I actually want to remember. I mean, I can remember most of this. And, because the hardest thing about this video, unlike the other ones, is that there was so many like definitions and specific consequences, remedies that I feel like I had to write the entirety of. Like I couldn't summarize much, because I feel like this is already like quite condensed, you know? Like a lot of these definitions and terms and stuff are really specific. So, okay. Implied terms. I mean, what I absolutely want to remember is the elements of contract formation, right? This is like super important. And so we've got, really, this is super, super, super important. Capacity to enter the contract, intention, offer and acceptance, consideration, and certainty and completeness. Hmm. Certainty and completeness. Vitiating. Factors. Okay. What should I do? Because okay, one option is close that. Study, no. Lore. Really, what I want to do is create a folder for every subject where where it has the stuff that I absolutely want to memorize, right? So like I have notes, so like categories of notes, right? I have notes that I want to remember and like have in my active memory, like. But then there's notes like notes that I want to know where I need to find in order to refresh memory. So like for example, for example, with mistakes, right? I want to remember that a unilateral mistake is a mistake that only one party has made, and that the party that has made the mistake will usually be held to their promise, right? But I don't need to remember like these distinctions of mistaken identity, or like when you're face to face, or an example of mistaken identity like not face to face, face to face. Because like if this subject comes up, like if I read something and the core matter is like a unilateral mistake, then I can just quickly reread my notes on this and then go back to whatever I was reading, right? How am I going to organize this? I've done that one. Okay. For now, what we're going to do aim to actually memorize most of the documents below. We'll start and yeah, so we'll do contract law and law 101 and legal definitions. And yeah, that's not that important. Okay. So what's going to be the easiest way to... All right, okay. I have the plan. Let's see if we can find AI tools that can generate quiz questions based off of an uploaded document. I forget what I used before. Quiz generator. Revisely. Let's give this a go. Create an account. Okay, let's make an account. Let's make an account. Oops. Revise. New. Username already in use. Okay. Beautiful. All right. Document. So if I go to contract law, and I wonder if it'll take a markdown. No, of course it won't. Of course it won't. Okay. But it will take a PDF. Okay. Stop. Okay. You can select up to 5 pages. I feel like I had a free. That was a free. Choose files. Cancel. Hold on. Okay, let's just. What if I just copy all of this? It's not like it has to be clean. If I just copy this into. Call this test. Boom. Get in there. Yeah. It's converting TXT to PDF. Oh my god. Is it? No. Multiple choice. Multiple choice. Oh, it's reading ACC remedies. Yeah. Has it gotten the start? Yeah. Yeah, it has gotten the start. All right. All right. All right. All right. All right. Hold on. Save. Close. All right. Cool. Okay. So what I should do. What I really should do is skim read the thing and then try the test, but that's fine. This will be we can look things up and it'll help. It'll be a more fun way of revising. What does force majeure clause do? Set out how the parties will handle unforeseen catastrophes. Increases the liability of parties. I think it's that one, but I'm going to double check. Force sets out how the parties will handle any unforeseen catastrophe, removes the liability of parties. For example, if there was a bushfire, you can't mow the lawn, you don't need to mow the lawn or pay for mowing. Okay. So A. What is the purpose of the choice of law clause? Yeah, it would be jurisdiction. I think. Sets out which jurisdictions laws will apply, defines terms of contract, specify. I think it's jurisdiction. Choice of law sets out which jurisdictions laws will apply if that is not already clear, such as which country's laws the parties agree to be bound by. Okay. Can I just make this? Can I just make this? I don't want this at all. I just want this page to be full screen. Whatever. Okay. What is the characteristic of implied terms in a contract? They fill in the gaps of the contract. I think it's A. They overturn existing terms. No, definitely not. They are always written into the contract. No, because they're implied. They are only applicable. No, they fill in the gaps of the contract because an implied term is something that doesn't need to be specifically in the contract. For example, if I think the example he gave was if you have a contract to mow my lawn, then the implied term is that the noise of the mower is okay because like it's standard business practice to use a motorized mower rather than like a scythe. So the landowner can't just come out and be like, hey, you're supposed to do this without any making any noise or making, using a motor. So an implied term would be the mower is allowed to use a modern mower, right? And I'll just double check that. Implied term. Not written into the contract or spoken about. These fall in the contract. They don't overturn anything. consistent course of dealing, industry standards, business efficacy, law generally, Australian consumer law. Okay, cool. What is the result of a fraudulent misrepresentation? Excuse me. Fraudulent. So you're deliberately misrepresenting something. Like, you're deliberately pretending to be a famous actor, giving someone acting lessons when you're not actually that actor. I don't know. It must be rescinded and damages claimed. It wouldn't be void because otherwise there's no punishment for the fraud, right? It has to be A. Let me double check that. Fraud. We'll just put this here so it's blocking off that because this is a nicer to look at. Yeah, rescinded by the innocent party, damages claimed. Oh, that's annoying. But I can do. Oh, yeah, no, that's fine. Cool. And consequence of major failure under the Australian consumer law. Consumer can reject a good. Yes. No. More multiple choice. I wonder if there's a limit on how many I can generate. I think there is. We'll just do if I can do 5 more, we'll just do 5 more. What must be true for an industry standard to be applied into a contract? Must be true. Must be virtually universal because it's implied, not written into the contract. Not doesn't have to be agreed. Must be virtually universal within that industry. Industry standard, virtually universal. Yeah. What is one of the 5 rules for including an implied term based on business efficacy? Not written. That wouldn't make any sense. That wouldn't make any sense. It must be reasonable and equitable. Yeah, that would be it. Reasonable and equitable. Yeah. What is the result of innocent misrepresentation? It's either one of these. I don't know. Like, rescinded is restoring the parties to their original condition. Contract is void. What is void again? It is as though the contract has never been. Australian law, if a contract is voided, is there any effort made to restore the parties to their original condition? Rescission. Void. Maybe we'll go Australian rescission versus void. Just read void. Rescission. Oh, rescission is a remedy for a void contract. Yeah. Oh, right. Right. Okay. 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 Let me just put this here. Right. Can be so, but what is the difference? If the contract is void, it also can be rescinded. So maybe my notes aren't clear because this is coming from my notes, right? Um. Well, misrepresentation. Contract can be rescinded. But is there a difference between... But if a contract can be rescinded, does that necessarily mean it is also void? Maybe it doesn't really matter. Oh. Okay, I'll need to read more into the key differences between that at some point. But it can be rescinded. Can be rescinded. Okay. Okay. Not necessarily void. Read more into void versus rescission. Oops. What is the consequence of a minor failure? Oh, yeah. Supplier can replace, repair, or refund. Yes. Definition of a void contract as though the contract has never been. Yeah. Cool. Let's just see if we can. Hold on, let's see if there's a limit. More. Small PDF. Let's just see how many it can create. Until we're. Can I not? Okay, more. I mean, if every day I do like 10 questions per, or 5 to 10 per document, and maybe I'll make a massive document with just all my notes in it. That should be good until I'll keep doing that until I have like no issue remembering everything, and then decrease the frequency of my testing. Did it work? Or did I interrupt it? I think I interrupted it. Let's see. Further actions. Okay, maybe it stopped, but okay. I might need to find another tool, but this is really cool. Really, really cool. Man, I'm so happy we finished that video. So happy. I think I can remember all of this. I think so. I reckon. Okay, so revision. What we're going to do here's the plan. Here's the plan. Per document, skim read to refresh memory, and then complete multiple choice questions. And say idea, create a single revision document for all of my notes, or document per subject. All right, I've got to go, but that was awesome. We're gonna do econ, or maybe more law next time. Yeah, cool, great, fun times. And I don't know if my first time streaming on YouTube, so I have no idea if the VOD is automatically going to be put into a playlist or how that works, but we'll see. We'll check it out. Also want to have a listen to see what the audio is like as well. Nice. Done.